Yay, Max is back.
Welcome, Max. We can probably get started.
Let's do it.
Hello, everyone.
Hey, Max, I was giving you a compliment. You managed to keep your face very static, which is great. Like, I don't know how you do that. Just like Megan.
Me too.
Sorry about that.
Yes, I do too. That's right.
We're all very good at sitting very still.
All right. So, Sage, Cassandra, what do we have on our list for today?
We have a bunch of different items. First of all, we want to give some people some updates on the release notes. So members of the core team will be doing that. We are kicking off a documentation work group. I'll be covering some of that, some of the logistics, and letting you know kind of why we're doing that. Wayne's going to talk about SEPs, and then we want to continue the conversation with DWAS about single branching releases. We kind of left that to the end because it's more open-ended than some of the other kind of announcement type items. So
Yeah, DWAS probably won't be joining us, but we can probably handle it with the team
okay.
here, so no problem.
Okay, so I guess the release notes is first. Maybe, Megan, I can just give an overarching actual update before we jump right into the release notes. As you recall, team, we are actually nearing the very final stages of making Neon available. We had set out the release cadence that we're on, which is essentially the train station of every 4 months. We started this in October, and we're now coming to the end of January, which has been set as our sort of train date. This is the first of our train schedules. The release candidate had been out there. Thank you to everybody in the community who's been working through those, giving us feedbacks and so on and so forth. And we actually have now started the process of creating, the many packages that we have for the platforms. So David Murphy from the core team, as well as Shane and many others are onto that. We are actually working through one packaging issue that we've observed on Windows. Once we get through that, it will get us into sort of the right sort of trajectory again to get all these packages made available. And I think that by the time we get to the middle of next week or so, we hopefully will be able to have the great news of these packages being available and public. Not exactly on the date, but it will be, maybe a couple of days after that, which is closer to our, intended train release schedule. And when we get to that particular junction, which hopefully will coincide with our next office hours, we'll be able to also talk about what's coming next for the plan for, heads up around sodium and the things that we'd want to tackle. But perhaps that's sort of an overarching message or theme for all of us here in the community as to where the team stands. Sage has been working diligently in the background to make sure that the release cadence is public and visible to everybody, so that everybody knows our dates. So, sodium will go essentially from the February into the June timeframe, which is our next 4-month cycle, and so on and so forth. But also, we're taking a lot of great input and feedback from many of our community members on working through things like making it transparent as to where we are within the release itself. So as we move into sodium, that will be one of the areas that Sage and team will start to expose, so that we can see where are we, are we in code freeze now, have we built some packages, and everybody can see where are we within the sub-milestones, if you like, beyond just, when an RC will be available, etc. So with that as an overarching overview of where we stand with the release, I think it's really worthwhile for us to just all hear from Megan on the release notes and maybe highlights of some of those. Megan?
Yeah, I'm just going to highlight some of the parts of the release notes. You can definitely check it. I'll actually include a link in the chat here so you can actually go look at it in more detail. at your leisure. So one of the things we highlight is obviously the new versioning that we keep talking about, with the version starting at 3000. So this release will be Salt 3000. Another note is currently Python 3.8 is not supported. We have an issue open to add this support, but for this release, it will not be supported. So any version 3.7, and lower. And another thing that is in the release notes is we are actually vendoring the Tornado code base because we still need to continue the work on upgrading to the Tornado 5 and 6. That work needs to be more thoroughly tested, and so we felt it was better to vendor the code base instead. Another issue we found that we note in the release notes is we tested with Message Pack 1, their RC, 1.0 RC, and that's currently not working with Salt. So we have an issue noted in the release notes as well, where you can monitor to see where we'll actually fix that post Neon. For some of the like features and whatnot, SaltStack module has added a couple of things. There's quite a lot of details that you can take a look at the actual release notes, but things like supporting Salt environments, adding the skip keyword, and so forth. You can check the keynotes for some more details there. Another cool feature I think is this unless and only if. You can actually pass in a module for it to run. It gives an example in the release notes of using file. That file exists, and then passing the path of that file. So you can run that state only if that file exists using Salt modules. There is a key store state end module for managing Java key store files. There's a new XML module. There's a pretty cool Jinja.load map execution module that will pretty much allow you to pretty much troubleshoot your map files before you use them and make sure it is what you expect the data to look like. Let's see, it looks like to beacons and engines, you can actually, in your config file, list multiple copies of a Salt engine if you just use the engine module syntax. And there's examples in there. And that's kind of the highlights, other than the deprecations, which we went through last time. That's it for me.
Great, thank you, Megan. Any questions on anything that she just covered? Nope. Okay. So one of the things that has been a recurring theme both in Slack conversations at SaltConf and just kind of ad hoc conversations elsewhere has been the need for basically better documentation, feedback that our documentation's weak, and that the community would like to know how to help improve it. And so one of the solutions we came up to help with that is to form a documentation work group. And we've done all of the groundwork to get that work group up and running. And so what we'll be covering basically Salt it's so expansive and it's got so much information, and we need a way to communicate with users how to use it and how to easily identify code that's recommended, stable, and supported. And we want to make sure that the documentation can somehow speak to users of all different levels. And so what we'll be doing is we'll be talking about things like adding more use case scenarios, how to make the documentation more relevant, potentially refactoring it, a lot of talk on clarifying tagging and tag usage, potentially some search, improvements to our search enhancements as well. So basically anything documentation related. The first meeting for the documentation work group is going to be February 20th at 3 p.m. Eastern, and then it will always meet the third Thursday of every month, and then of course be published online after we meet. Our work group captain is going to be Alan Kulger of Terminal Labs, and then Elisa Rock from SaltStack has been working with Alan and me to get this all up and running. So as of right now, we have the work group in place. We have the first meeting scheduled. We'll be making some announcements, and we're in the process of setting up some of the reference docs in GitHub at the moment.
Very cool. I'm excited about that one.
Me too. Any questions on that one? All right, Wayne, you're up with the SEPs then.
All right, yeah.
Actually, I'm sorry. I do have a question, Cassandra, that just came in here. Can we elaborate a little bit more around the scope of what the group will do? Is it simply currency of the documentation? Is it tackling areas like samples and so on? Sorry, that had come in before from our last week, and we didn't answer it.
It's fairly open-ended. It's just going to be a matter of what everybody wants to tackle on it. But we do want, like with all of the work groups, we want practical things to come out of it that have been completed.
Okay. I think it would be good perhaps because I think that one of the issues, and this came from Smith, I think one of the concerns is that maybe the word documentation, people don't naturally think of that as inclusive of things like samples. And so on. So I think that's really the root of the issue is we might want to just publicize that if folks want to tackle that particular angle as well, absolutely join the group and there'll be capacity. I know that Alan himself and some of his peers who are going to be working on this, they themselves are very much in the process of directly supporting client projects, etc., in which they're building these samples. And I've also observed in a lot of our chats, you know, people asking is, hey, is there a working sample for this or is there a working sample for that? So I think we may want to specifically tackle that particular piece.
Definitely. Okay, cool. I made a note of that as well, and we'll, you know, as we're working through this, we'll decide when and how to address that.
Yeah, I think Laura Smith might be, I know I don't see her on the call, but she might be somebody worthwhile going back to Cassandra and just getting a little bit more around the areas that might be of priority.
Okay, and then there's also a document that Elisa had created that was a lot of the different requests we got around documentation at SaltConf. So looking to see if samples are mentioned in that or not. Okay. All right, cool. Wayne, you ready?
Yeah, sure. So this is specifically around this, the salt enhancement proposal for blackening the salt code base. As I'm sure most people are aware by now, there's a tool called Black, and what Black does is it automatically formats your Python code. And the reason it's called Black is due to the statement by Henry Ford about the Model T, you can have any color you like as long as it's black. Using a tool like Black allows us to basically bypass any kind of issues with coding style because we really don't care how you write your code. Black will format it for you, and then you can always know that the code is going to look exactly like Black formats it. So it makes it really handy because we also don't have to worry about, like on a code review, if somebody submits some code and maybe the style is a little bit strange looking, we don't have to waste any cycles like dealing with that mentally. That problem goes away. So we can actually focus on the meat of the change. So we opened this proposal a few, I think maybe months ago now, and seemed to get good reception. But one of the challenges we've discovered on running it on about a 300,000 line code base is that as we merge code, everything changes for it. So when I went through and actually, solved, because once I ran through that, then I had a bunch of lint issues that I had to go and fix. But once I fixed all of those, by the time I did that, several code pull requests had been merged. So there were a bunch of merge conflicts because of how it changed the code in these affected files, which is basically every file in Salt. So our plan to avoid that is, now that we're getting into this code freeze, feature freeze for Neon, our first merge after the code thaws will be this one to Blacken Salt. And so what that will allow is, well, it'll kind of inflict black on all of the pull requests. So basically any pull request that somebody has will immediately have merge conflicts, at least very likely so. So they'll need to go in and update that. So there's a bit of a cost there, but it's much easier, I think, to do that on a case-by-case basis rather than trying to race to catch up and make sure that black works for everything. The other advantage of it is that it gives us the longest amount of time possible before the sodium release to have this code base formatted with black. And black is very careful and cautious about what it does. It actually, when it reformats the code, it makes sure that from Python's perspective, the code is identical. The parse code comes out the same. Otherwise, it won't actually make the change. So we shouldn't have any issues, but we do have 300,000 lines of code. So it's a very complex code base. So just having that extra safety net of, as much time as possible before sodium to catch any potential bugs is a good thing. But again, we shouldn't have any. We don't expect any. The biggest challenge is just going to be we're going to have everybody who's got an open pull request go ahead and update their pull requests. But just wanted to make sure that's out in the community and start getting that kind of disseminated so that people can be ready once we do merge that they'll have to go ahead and update their pull requests. The other advantage of doing it that way is most people who produce a pull request are the most familiar with the code. So they're the ones who know, okay, what is it that I'm actually doing here? Whereas if somebody's got to go in behind the scenes and clean all that stuff up, they may inadvertently introduce bugs, which is obviously undesirable. So that's kind of our plan around that enhancement proposal, and I can go ahead and paste the link to that. But unless there are any questions, that is all for me.
No questions? All right, then let's kind of continue the conversation about single branch and releases and fixes. It sounds like there's some confusion around those items, and so we're working to clarify or address that confusion. And you said DWAS isn't on the meeting, so who wants to take that?
I can go ahead and address that, I think.
All right, thanks.
Assuming I've understood everything correctly, I think there's a little bit of confusion around the messaging of it, as far as like what support means and things. So the new branching and release strategy, the biggest change is that in the past, what we have done in Salt is we've had 3 running releases, and each of those releases would get bug fixes, and even some of them, sometimes we backport features. And so the biggest change is that process is not going to happen anymore. Bug fixes and features are just going to happen in the master branch and get released along with our, in our release cadence that Mo's talked about. I think we're currently on 4 months, and the plan is to get that down to a 3-month release cycle. So what that means is that people should be upgrading to the latest and greatest Salt, at least if they want the new bug fixes and features. But we aren't just, throwing those releases to the wolves, as it were. If there's a CVE or a major critical issue that just breaks Salt, we do have the capability to go back and cut another release on those branches. A perfect example of that is what happened recently with the 2018.3.5 release, I think it was, which was a CVE release. So in the future, if there are CVEs discovered, we will go ahead and make sure those are available in previous Salt releases. But we won't be doing feature work or even minor bug fixes. If it's a major bug that really does affect a lot of people and is super critical, we do have the capability of going back to fix those, but it shouldn't be expected. Typically, it should be unlikely based on our new branching and release strategy, because the way that we're releasing, we're doing release candidates prior to the release. So people should be able to go ahead and download those and test them in their own environments to make sure that they're kind of ahead of the game. So that will help. And then on the other side of the release, once it's actually cut, we'll still remain in a code freeze for, I think it's 2 to 3 weeks. And our experience in the past has been that most major issues that we don't catch during our testing are typically revealed within that first 2 to 3 weeks after a release. So that will give us the time to go ahead and cut a new release based on those issues that we find and are able to fix before we start merging other new fixes and features in. The other benefit to that is that the release will only contain those fixes that apply to bugs that we've found. So they should be much smaller and less intrusive. So they shouldn't introduce any other bugs. So it should be a much more stable process as we go through that release process. But that's kind of the I guess the nuts and the bolts of that release process. Did I get everything? Is that and then for the core team, does that did I get anything wrong that you're aware of, or is that the right way that we've discussed?
Yeah, Wayne, I think it would be great to hear from the community members, Carl or Max, if there are some thoughts on what we just went through. That would be much appreciated.
I have seen some questions around this in specific tickets, and so I think that we just, if we don't have any questions here, we'll start addressing those individually and try to make that very clear as to where those are going to be fixed and when, and try to make that communication broad and explicit.
Yeah, that would be great, Sage. Thank you. Because I know these have created, generated some engagement and so on. And so, Wayne, I think you're correct in calling out, the ask for the feedback here. And so, Sage and Cassandra, if we can just give a little bit these steps visibility so that we can get some of the feedback, we'd appreciate it before the period, ends.
Has the SEP been announced or anything in Slack yet, or is that something that still needs to be done?
This SEP, we've actually gone through the process of going through the community, and it's been approved and merged. months ago. So I think that, yeah, so there still seems to be some residual confusion around it. So I think just as long as we continue to be accurate and make sure that we're communicating that and all on the same page, I think that will be helpful.
That's why I say that I think we need to start addressing it individually as where people are asking specific questions, because we've talked about it broadly, we've approved that SEP, we feel like we've communicated, but then we realize there's going to be some sort of deeper dives that we need to do individually with each one, and we want to do those and then communicate that broadly as well.
Yeah, and again, for everybody on the call or those who are listening, please feel free to reach out to Cassandra, Sage, Wayne on these SEPs so that we can facilitate these discussions. I recognize, for example, that our SEP Slack channel is not exactly perhaps the most active one, and we have very few subscribers to it. And as you said, Sage, the discussion is happening elsewhere. So this is yet another opportunity to publicize this. So Cassandra, I think there's no harm in re-alerting everybody that, hey, this SEP is about to get into, its final stage here. So engage with us now, please. Otherwise, we'll implement it.
Yeah, this one's implemented, so I think it's more about the communication going forward, right? Like, so this is now implemented. Yep. What does it mean for this thing? So yeah, and we'll do that. We want to make sure you guys have that communication.
Yep.
I think that's all our topics. Does anybody have questions for us?
Crickets so far. I do want to say, back to the documentation work group, that's been an exciting thing to be working on, because it's been kind of a partnership between somebody at SaltStack and somebody from the community working together to make this thing happen. That's been really a fun little process to go through and work through, and I think it just shows what happens if we are all kind of expressing what it is that we'd like to see in the community and then working to actually make that happen. And so probably be seeing some more things like that come along in the coming months, where we are collaborating more closely between SaltStack and community.
Yeah, I was really surprised. We went to SaltStack SaltConf this year, and we had that work group kind of set up, and we weren't really sure what was going to happen. We weren't sure if we'd get people interested, and it ended up being one of our biggest work groups, and we were thrilled, and that is just amazing. And so I'm glad to see that it's moving forward and that we've got this great collaboration, and I'm actually excited to kind of be a part of it as much as I can be, because I think it's just neat. And Elisa, who is on the SaltStack side, is an amazing tech writer and really great to work with. And so I think that we're going to just see some really great things come from that. I don't know the community member very well, but I've heard great things. And so I think it's going to be awesome.
And I think one of the things that made it happen relatively quickly is that it would happen quicker if it wasn't for holidays and things. But I think what helped it happen so quickly is that somebody stepped up and said, hey, I want to lead this thing. And a lot of times we want to implement something or we want to get something started. I'm happy to help facilitate, but it always helps if somebody steps up and says, hey, I want to lead this thing, I'll run with this thing, and then I can work on the support behind and help everybody make that happen and communicate between different parties involved. So
yeah, and not to discount the work that you're doing and your new role, because I think that that's actually been fantastic. I think that that is one of the main reasons as well. And so thank you.
Thanks. All right, final thoughts? All right, then I guess everybody gets 20-some minutes back in their day. As always, reach out to, like Mo said, me or Sage or anybody about anything you want to talk about in further detail, and have a good day.
Thank you so much, Cassandra. Thank you, team. Have a good day.
Thanks, guys. Have a great day.